Okay, everybody, welcome to the Hard Sell with me, your host, Joel Stevenson. For those of you that are listening to the show for the first time, we're trying to peel back the curtain of sales. Sales can be a complicated area, but it's one that a lot of us interact with, whether we're in sales or not. And so we try to bring sales leaders, whether they're sales leaders or CEOs or sales experts on the show to try to make things simpler in terms of understanding sales and what it takes to be successful in this area. And today we've got a great guest who brings, in my mind, a very interesting product and engineering mindset to selling that I think you'll be really fascinated to listen to. And Elery Pfeffer is a guest, and he's the founder and CEO of Nift Networks, which I'm going to have him describe in just a moment here. And prior to Nift, Elery also founded Pursway. So he's a serial entrepreneur. I think that counts as serial, and has held a number of executives roles as well, and has quite an interesting international background. So Elery, welcome to the Hard Sell.
Hi, Joel.
So, Elery, maybe just for background for folks that aren't familiar with Nift Networks, why don't you just tell us a little bit about Nift and what you guys are doing over there?
So for those of you who don't know, Nift is basically a two-sided marketplace, and we have two audiences. We have partners and we have brand partners. And gifting partners, what gifting partners basically do is they use the platform to give their consumers gifts for taking a positive action. So you might think about renewing your gym membership and you would get a Nift card as a thank you. And on the other side, we have brand partners, and what they do is they provide these gifts, and from their perspective, it's a great way to get a new consumer to try out a brand they've never heard about. So that's kind of what we do. We have about 12 million consumers in the US. We have 8,000 businesses. We're growing pretty quickly. And we have these three audiences: the consumer, who's getting great gifts, the partner, who's able to provide great gifts to their consumers, and we have brand partners who are able to get their name out there and get people to try them out.
Right. And it's been, I happen to have a little bit inside baseball since Elery and I have known each other for a little while, but the story has been pretty interesting, sort of pre-COVID, during COVID, post-COVID. And now as you sort of think about the business post-COVID and people starting to come back to local businesses and that being such an important part of, kind of community dynamics and other stuff, like what are you seeing out there? Are you seeing that things are starting to pick up again for local businesses?
Yeah. So initially, when we started out, we started introducing consumers to local businesses. So you would get a $30 at a local restaurant to try it out. Luckily, in 2019, we saw the potential in online, and it was a very timely decision. We were ramping online very quickly during 2019, and then 2020, March of 2020, basically all local businesses overnight were forced to kind of shut down by the government, and so that kind of part of our business was put in a holding pattern while our online business has grown dramatically. And what we're seeing now actually is we're seeing a resurgence in local businesses where people are coming back. They're doing it very cautiously because of this new variant. And every couple of months, there's another COVID news that kind of throws a kink in growth of local businesses. But we have started seeing it come back. We have started seeing consumers go back to local businesses, restaurants, gyms, and other verticals.
Or which is certainly very encouraging to hear. But I guess let's talk a little bit about some of the sales challenges and things that you figured out over time. And so I think one of the things that I find very interesting about your business as being a two-sided marketplace is that the the people on either side of the marketplace can be very different in the sense that you've got some massive enterprises that you're selling to that are starting to use the platform to drive advertising scale and other interesting awareness tactics. Then you've got some of these smaller businesses that are the perhaps a recipient of some of these things. And so maybe we'll start with the sort of the bigger side of things, which is I had a prior guest talk about this idea that when you're a founder and you're first started selling, you initially sell on a whiteboard and then you sell in PowerPoint, and then eventually you sort of get to the PDF stage of selling. And maybe talk to me a little bit about how that's evolved for you with some of these enterprise processes of you've had to figure it out, and then eventually you need to get other people to help, sort of pass it on and do it at scale. How do you think about that, and how have you been able to navigate that?
So, fortunately or unfortunately, I've had some experience in developing my own point of view on how things should be done. Meaning, how should I go about understanding the sales process for a given vertical, and then perfecting it to kind of a basic point, and then handing it over to somebody else. So I think that my point of view, and maybe it will be helpful to others, is the goal of a company is to add value to its customers, to its employees, to its shareholders, in other audiences. And you receive some of that value back in form of revenue. And then within that, the role of sales, the entire company should be focused on adding that value and creating that revenue opportunity, not just sales. And sales is a very crucial part in that mix. It won't happen without product, but it won't happen without sales. And understanding the sales process is really understanding the company. So what I like to do is run the first 10 sales processes myself until it's kind of stable. And one of the things that I've learned about sales is you can have a mindset of how do I complete the transaction and how do I generate revenue, or you can have a mindset of how can I create value. And I think if you have a mindset of how I can create value to my customer, everything else is kind of going to work itself out. So what I like to do is I like to go through 10 processes where I try to do discovery, understand what are the pain points, and understand if we can really solve those pain points. And understand if the pain points are big enough to make a major impact in that company's life. And I want to pause on that point because it's an important point. You can create something you can sell, but if it's not going to create enough value, even if it does create value, if it doesn't create enough value, it is not going to be robust, and it's not going to be withstand the test of time when it comes to go to market. So I try to answer, can we create enough value for our partner? Start with discovery, understand their immediate, most impactful pain points, understand if we can bring something to the table, and understand if I see that over and over and over again. And I don't think that it actually changes, whether it's an enterprise process, a mid-market process, or an SMB process. If you talk to an SMB, a small local business, you're talking to a CEO of a company. They care about their business as much, if not more, than a CEO of a Fortune 500. And the advantage of a CEO of a Fortune 500 is they have staff to execute, and a small business owner probably doesn't. So the bar on execution might be even higher. But at the same time, it's all the same across different verticals, is where can we add value, and how can we capture some of that value back in terms of revenue. So once we have that, everything else across the different sales processes is probably completely different. So for example, in an enterprise sales process, there is not as fast as progress from beginning to revenue as it would with mid-market and smaller business. So how do you measure progress? What are the different milestones across the sales process to make sure that there's progress and not just activity? And so I try to scope those out. I try to scope out what are the value point or their objection point, and really scope out what would later become enablement material that will allow us to pass. And it's not just me. I have a lot of others helping me pass it on to others.
Right. And I want to go back to something you said earlier about this concept of, there's sort of two different ways to approach the selling process. And you really prefer, this approach of like, hey, let's figure out if there's a lot of joint value to be created. And if there is, that's great. We'll figure it out. If there isn't, then we'll go do something else. And to what extent do you find that as you're trying to build a sales organization that shares that same value, do you find that difficult, or do you find that like the questions that you're asking potential candidates might be a little bit different? Are you looking for maybe different qualities than what someone might assume you would see in sort of a typical sales candidate that presents?
Yeah, so I think that's a really, really important question, Joel. I think that having a strategic view on sales and having kind of everything aligned in your organization, including hiring and training to that strategic goal, is critical. For me, sales is a craft. It's a profession that people can get good at and better at and fantastic at. It's not something that you're born with. I've experts be the best salespeople, and it's about what is the mindset of the person. Are they willing to be coached? Are they willing to learn? And what is it that they're in it for? Are they in it for creating value for others and themselves, or just value for themselves? And I think that having that kind of mindset to begin with is super important. And if not everybody's aligned across the organization with that kind of thinking, you're going to get hires that don't reflect that. And that's where things can get a little wobbly. So I think having the first set of hires really align with those values, specifically in a sales organization, is critical for its success.
Yeah, I think one thing that I've found over time that I think is quite simple, maybe rhymes with what you're saying, is this idea that, some of the best salespeople are the most curious. That they really want to understand how different businesses work. They want to try to understand how to make this sort of complicated set of things come together. And sort of this idea that like one of the first sales calls I was ever on myself, I had this guy who recognized I was early in it, and he was very experienced. And he was like, he's like, I think what he said was, God gave you, 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. And I've always found that to be somewhat true in the selling process, is that, and I think to your point about like, it isn't necessarily a personality type, because sometimes sometimes some of the more introverted personality types can be more patient listeners, which then in turn leads to better discovery questions, et cetera.
I couldn't agree more. Being curious is a first indication that you're interested in others, and combine that with a value-adding mentality, and you got like the makings of a very good to excellent sales professional. Start with being curious, and then figure out how to add value. And for salespeople who are very good at it, you'd find that they have more options to add value than within their own company, and they can For example, they qualify a lead. They see the lead isn't qualified. You have a conversation with an executive. You see your solution doesn't really match. What are other ways you can add value to that person? Can you refer them to resources online that are relevant to their mindset, their stage of the company, where they are right now? Can you offer networking opportunities? And people who continuously add value, that value then compounds because it's going to get back to them in either in this job or the next job. And I think those are the ones that have a long-term potential of being very strong winners.
Yeah, that's right. I think it's especially true now in the sense that you know people's time. I think especially if you get the benefit of some in-person time with somebody, it's almost like this people care more now because we've now all adjusted to this idea that you can get a lot of things done quickly or remotely, digitally, and if I'm going to show up either even to a Zoom call or to an in-person meeting, my expectations of what's the value that's going to be delivered in that meeting, I think, is now much higher than it used to be. And so, like, for the ability for somebody to come off, even in a case where it's not a great fit but still add value, is someone that's going to be remembered when maybe circumstances change inside that company. So that's well said. Now, Elery, maybe a slightly different take on that is you've I know over time hired a number of people where this is their first sales job, and I'm curious, maybe if you could talk a little bit about, if there's anything maybe different about, trying to identify people that would be good in their first sales job, or, how do you get somebody successful in their first sales job so that you can start to build, a bigger, more high velocity type of model, which is generally you're going to be hiring younger people or less experienced reps for that type of model.
Yeah, so I think that this is a great question. I think that everything you can be curious, you can have a value add or helper mentality, and you can have that without ever having a job in your entire life. And on top of that, having kind of an athletic, and it doesn't have to be athletic, but this is the best example, athletic mindset of being coached, of knowing nobody's good and nobody's perfect at anything, and everybody can be coached. And if I can be coached, I want to be coached. And then I want to try again until I get it right. And this is the mentality that you want. I think that the reverse mentality of I'm going to figure it out on my own, or I can't learn anything, or worse, I'm in it to make a buck. Those are likely going to fail faster than the people who have an athlete mentality towards not just sales but also success in anything that you would do. Getting coached, getting better is really critical.
Right. Yeah, for sure. But I've seen that as well in my career. What about, like, if you maybe a slightly different side of the skill set that we talked about earlier? It's like, empathy, or ability to listen and understand what somebody on the other side of the phone or the other side of Zoom is trying to say. I mean, I suppose further on career candidates might have more evidence of that, but if you're getting sort of a new college grad or something, or any ideas about how to sort of screen for that as well, or do you even think that's important?
I think that's critical. We typically see what the candidate asks. They're in a sales process. They're trying to sell themselves into a job. And if they're curious about the job, if they want to understand the problem they're trying to solve for us, that's a very good sign they have those skills. And if they're not, and they ask questions that are mostly focused on themselves, it's probably um, not the best way to handle a sales process. And we just, this is something that we've kind of learned over time. Those are the best indications of potential future success rather than a canned list of questions um, for people who have no experience.
Right. And then I've never sort of been inside your sales process, but knowing you a little bit, I think at least for, sort of that, higher velocity SMB type of model, I imagine, you guys do a good job with metrics and management and process. And so maybe just talk a little bit about that and like the ability to use um, sort of a well-instrumented process to understand if someone's on track or, your ability to sort of scale the org, et cetera.
Yeah, so we do have a lot of metrics. At some point, we had 500 people doing this. So and we were growing very, very, very quickly. So having a process and metrics to inform and allow our management to focus where we should spend their attention was critical for us. Um, with a high velocity sales process, and any sales process is about activity and outcomes. And the enterprise part of it, activity, progress, and outcomes. There's a lot of management that you need to overlay. What's the ideal customer profile? What's the enablement material, and so forth. But from an execution standpoint, is that it's activity and outcomes. And so that's what we try to measure with our high velocity sales process. What is the activity? And you can define that in multiple ways. And you can figure out a way to weight activities and know that if you're not pitching, then you should be prospecting. And then for us, it was very quick from activity to outcomes. So we can just measure outcomes almost right away to see meeting sets and how many conversions we had. And so I think from a sales management perspective, as soon as the team becomes a little bit big, if you don't have metrics and an underlying process that clearly indicates what are the outcomes, what's the progress, and what's the activity, managing it is becoming, or at least for us, without it, it would have been completely unwieldy.
Right. And yeah, not only did you scale to those numbers, but you scaled to those numbers with people, I think it's fair to say that like had basically never sold before.
Yes.
So, I mean, it's quite an impressive feat to not only be able to build the mousetrap, but then be sort of, or sort of build the machine, but then also kind of fill the machine with people that not only had to learn your particular, brand of selling and your product and what you were putting in the market, but also learn how to sell. Full stop. That was a very impressive accomplishment, and it's no surprise to see Nift continuing to do very, very well and adapt in this changing world that we operate in.
Yeah, it's a credit to the team mostly. But yes, we had pre-COVID, January 2020, we grew our team by a factor of 3 in 1 month. And we're talking about adding not 20 people, adding a significant amount of people and with maintaining the same quality of results. So from 1 month to another, we grew by a factor of 3, and all the outcome and results grew by a factor of 3. So it did work. It worked very, very well. Obviously, COVID hit, and we couldn't continue to scale at that pace. But yeah, it worked, and it was a complete credit to the team who built this machine and kind of got it to this scale, including hiring and sales management and sales ops and other areas.
Yeah, that's great. Definitely impressive. Well, we're gonna we're going to start to wrap things up here, and if anybody has questions in the audience, you can either ask to be invited on stage or put it in the chat, and we'll try to look. And while we're waiting to see if there are any questions, Elery, if people want to be in touch, learn more about Nift, or be in, what's the best way to do that?
So there's numerous emails on our website for Nift. If you want to have, again, not try to please, I'm inundated with sales calls, but if somebody wants to get in touch, it's Elery@gonift.com.
Okay, that's great. That's awesome. So, so check out Nift Networks if you haven't. It's a really interesting, innovative way to bridge, to help you, if you're a consumer, discover new retailers that you may not know about, and then if you're an advertiser, the really interesting audience acquisition metrics that mousetrap that these guys have figured out that you should check out. So, Elery, thanks very much for being on the show, and look forward to speaking with you soon.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
All right, take care.
Bye.